93 only. I just turned 93.
But you don't look old.
What you know?
Imelda Marcos, the wife of former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, ruled as First Lady for over 20 years before her world crumbled. As her husband's regime turned into a brutal dictatorship, Imelda faced intense scrutiny for her lavish spending and a notorious shoe collection, while the regime was steeped in corruption and human rights violations. When the tide turned, the Marcos couple fled the country, leaving behind a troubled legacy. What compelled them to escape? And how were their lives in exile? Join us as we delve into the tumultuous life of Imelda Marcos and reveal the realities of her exile. Bribery allegations in convention and extravagant spending.
And all the while millions of his people lived in filth and disease, Marcos and his family lived in glittering splendor.
While many Filipinos lived in poverty, Imelda Marcos became known for her lavish spending. She traveled to New York City and other destinations to buy expensive fashions, high-end jewelry, and other luxury items. Marcos had to have the finest of everything for the presidential residence, the Malacanang Palace. But all of this splendor was gained at the cost of the Filipino people. It is believed that the Marcos family and their cronies took billions from the country's coffers. The Marcos family is accused of plundering billions of dollars by creating dummy foundations in several Swiss bank accounts. On the 4th of May, 1972, the Constitutional Convention delegate for Leyte's 1st District, Eduardo Quintero, accused Imelda and 13 others of bribing some of the convention members to vote against provisions that would have prevented Marcos from retaining power beyond the 2 four-year terms allowed him by the previous constitution. In the stress following the accusations and media circus, Imelda claimed to have suffered a miscarriage. Later, this was revealed to be a hoax to avoid Quintero's charges. Ellison said this was an eloquent example of the lengths to which Imelda would go to support Ferdinand and her ambition. In Ferdinand's diary, he wrote that he and Imelda were planning to wager all their power and wealth on a single throw of the dice of fate for the sake of the people and the Republic. In addition to theft and corruption, the Marcos regime was also known for its oppressive rule. The martial law he declared in September 1972 made him the country's dictator. Ferdinand stated that the purpose of martial law was to create a new society with reformed institutions and no inequalities, corruption, or crime. Imelda called it martial law with a smile. This move allowed him to crush growing resentment among the people and prevent his adversaries from unseating him from power. The Marcos government could be brutal to those who opposed it. Thousands were tortured, and others were executed without trial. Do you think the country was pleased with this oppressive rule? Before we unveil the country's reactions to all these, let's unveil how all these started. How did Imelda become the First Lady of the Philippines? And what was her life like before then? Imelda Remedios Visitacion Romualdez was born on the 2nd of July, 1929 in Manila, the capital city of the Philippines. Her parents were Vicente Orestes Romualdez, a lawyer, and his second wife, Maria Remedios Trinidad. Imelda is the 6th of Vicente's 11 children and Remedios' firstborn. She grew up with 5 younger siblings and several older half-siblings from her father's first marriage. Born into the Romualdez political dynasty from Leyte, Imelda grew up in a wealthy clan of devout Catholics. She was baptized in the nearby San Miguel Church the day after her birth. At the time of her birth, the Romualdezes were wealthy. However, Imelda experienced hardship at a young age. She lost her mother to pneumonia when she was 8. Around 1932, the financial conditions of her family began to decline as her father's law practice fizzled out around the same time. In November 1938, her father gave up Manila due to his declining fortunes in his law practice. He returned to Tacloban in Leyte, his home province, where he could support his family with a simpler lifestyle. Imelda finished grade 1 in the nearby College of the Holy Spirit Manila, where her older half-sisters also studied. She continued her early studies at Holy Infant Academy, a convent school run by the Order of Saint Benedict. At school, she had to face her family's humiliating poverty and was frequently among the students who had to apologize for late payments. In 1942, her family returned to Tacloban, and around that time, Imelda's father refused to let her go back to school as her family continued to struggle financially. When the Americans returned in 1944, she was eager to resume her studies at Leyte Progressive High School. She finished her first year at the provincial high school, where she was also chosen Miss IA. In her second year, she moved to Holy Infant Academy and stayed there until she graduated in 1948. Imelda got involved in politics right from college. She ran for president of the Student Council at St. Paul's College, now named Divine Word University, in 1951, 3 years before her marriage to Marcos. While an undergraduate student, she taught at a local Chinese high school before graduating with a degree in education in 1952. Her career and marriage tell the story of her rise to prominence as the First Lady of the Philippines despite her humble beginning. Stay tuned as we soon uncover her marriage to Ferdinand Marcos. In 1952, Marcos moved to Manila to live with a cousin who was also a politician, the House of Representatives of the Philippines Speaker, pro tempore Daniel Romualdez. Imelda's status in the Romualdez household was higher than servants and lower than family members as a poor relative. She found work as a salesgirl in a store called P.E. Domingo, which infuriated her father when he learned of it during one of his visits, perceiving it as ill treatment of Imelda. To calm her father's indignation, Eduardo and Daniel exercised their political and economic influence to find work for Imelda at the central bank, where she worked under the chief clerk of the intelligence division. During this time, her cousin Loreto Ramos introduced her to Adoracion Reyes, a teacher from the College of Music and Fine Arts of Philippine Women's University. She gave her vocal lessons and a chance to get a PWU scholarship. She later sang 3 songs at a performance with her cousin Loreto at Holy Ghost College, now named College of the Holy Spirit Manila. Imelda also entered the 1953 Miss Manila beauty pageant. The results became controversial, and Imelda and Miss Norma Jimenez were declared Manila's candidates for the larger Miss Philippines pageant. Unfortunately, both of them eventually lost to Miss Cristina Galang.
You fall in love with a man, you marry the minute you were born, because you start again dreaming you're kind of a dream man, and suddenly here he comes. Then you say, this is love at first sight.
Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos met on the 6th of April, 1954, during a budget hearing at the Philippine Congress. Ferdinand was a politician and part of the opposition team that led the argument against the budget, while Imelda was there to visit her cousin Daniel, the Speaker of the House. During a recess, Imelda caught Ferdinand's eye, and he asked his journalist friend Jose Guevara of the Manila Times to introduce him to Imelda. At that time, Ferdinand already knew of Imelda. She, on the other hand, knew very little about Ferdinand Marcos. After comparing heights and confirming that he was at least an inch taller than her, Ferdinand sought the help of Guevara to pursue Imelda in marriage. During Holy Week of that year, Ferdinand showered Imelda with flowers and gifts and visited her daily, prodding her to sign the marriage license that sealed the agreement. On the 16th of April, 1954, Good Friday, after having been jokingly asked by Guevara if she wanted to be the First Lady of the land someday, Imelda finally agreed to sign it. Imelda and Ferdinand married 11 days after meeting in a small civil ceremony. A month later, they threw an elaborate bash for friends and family. Their wedding was held on the 1st of May, 1954, at the San Miguel Pro Cathedral in Manila, where Imelda was christened. Imelda Marcos cared for the couple's growing family as her husband climbed the country's political ladder. They eventually had 3 children, Ime, Ferdinand Jr., or Bong Bong, and Irene. Was Imelda's marriage much of what she expected? How was her life as the First Lady of the Philippines? And what led to the allegations that took power away from them? Keep watching for these answers. When Ferdinand was first elected to the presidency in 1965, he and Imelda set out to make good on their campaign vow that he would strengthen the Philippines while she would beautify it. It was during this campaign that Imelda became influential as a political figure at the national level, supporting her husband's political tactics through her charismatic appeal and youth. Crowds of working-class Filipinos came out in droves to Marcos's campaigns because they wanted to see the beautiful wife of Marcos. Campaign strategists incorporated Imelda's public appeal into the overall tone of the Marcos-led Nacionalista campaign. Marcos heavily relied on Imelda, eventually telling the press at one point that it was Imelda who had delivered the 1 million vote margin he needed to win the election. During this period, Imelda described herself as a neophyte transitioning into a true political partner to her husband as a butterfly breaking out of its cocoon. This led one foreign journalist to call her the Iron Butterfly. Imelda had assumed a managerial position in her husband's campaign early on when Marcos faced his first challenge, which was to win the presidential candidacy for the Nacionalista Party. During the presidential election, she delivered votes from the southern provinces of Leyte and Manila. She was especially popular with the poor with the help of the Blue Ladies, a group initially composed of wives of political men in the Nacionalista Party. Imelda also used her voice to appeal to voters, singing during campaigns. Her songs were usually a variety of local folk songs. Ferdinand was elected president in 1965, and Imelda, with her beauty and poise, soon drew comparisons to another famous First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy. A year into Ferdinand's first term, as he took on the defense portfolio and boosted his influence over the military, Imelda was appointed to lead the development of a Manila Cultural Center complex, an undertaking for which she justified massive loans to build brutalist buildings as venues for art, music, and theater. However, Imelda's pet projects, one activist described her as having an edifice complex, led the Philippine foreign deficit to skyrocket from millions when Ferdinand was senator in 1962 to billions by the time he was deposed 2.5 decades later. Imelda met a diverse mix of world leaders as First Lady, from United States President Lyndon B. Johnson and Cuban leader Fidel Castro to Libyan dictator Muammar al-Gaddafi. She sought out political opportunities for herself in addition to supporting her spouse. In the mid-1970s, Marcos served as governor of the Metro Manila area, spearheading many costly beautification and development projects. She later served in the Interim National Assembly and as the Minister of Human Settlements. Throughout their debt-ridden rule, the Marcoses tried to give the impression that their opulence reflected the Philippines' prosperity. Still, the national economy only worsened, and discontent eventually triggered social unrest. With growing protests from opposition leaders, student groups, and the rural and urban poor, the couple's power came increasingly under threat. And by 1972, Ferdinand, having already been elected twice, could not run for a third time. Ferdinand could indefinitely extend his and Imelda's official grip on power, snuffing out political obstacles and opposition with his new martial rule. Still, Imelda didn't want to be seen as merely a dictator's wife. She was determined to prove that she was nonetheless revered, from staging pageants and boxing matches to distract from the brutality of her husband's authoritarianism to taking center stage in international diplomacy. She went to great lengths to eliminate any indication that she was unloved. In 1978, Imelda ranked below well-renowned government critic Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. in a poll asking university students who their heroes were. Imelda reportedly fumed over the survey results, and military trucks raided the newspaper office to report on the poll, seizing and destroying all the embarrassing copies. 3 years later, in 1981, when 169 people lost their lives in the partial collapse of a film center being built at Imelda's Cultural Center complex, the Marcos administration suppressed reports of the damage and death toll and pushed for the construction to continue apace despite the apparent risks, just so that it would be completed in time for a 1982 film festival that she had been promoting to be the Cannes of Asia. Even as more of the Filipino public turned against the Marcos regime, Imelda seemed to tune it out, projecting an image of calm or celebration, like everything was going just fine. While her country was in shambles, she was caught romping in the infamous New York nightclub Studio 54, which Byrne has credited as the inspiration for the discotheque setting of his musical. Subsequently, she lost power in the Philippines and escaped to Hawaii. How did this happen, and what is her life in exile like? Exile in Hawaii. With the murder of vocal Marcos opponent Benigno Aquino in 1983, the Marcos government began to lose its hold over the Filipino people. The couple was rumored to have ordered his murder, which was carried out by the military. While their connection to Ninoy's murder remains unproven to this day, his death sparked an immense and prolonged backlash against the couple's autocratic rule. Ferdinand announced a snap election on the 7th of February, 1986. To prove that the Philippines still adored him and Imelda, snap elections were held between him and Corazon Aquino, the widow of Benigno Aquino Jr. Corazon Aquino, Ninoy's widow, who had become a symbol of a growing pro-democracy movement, ran against him. However, the real results weren't to be known. Despite Ferdinand Marcos claiming to have won the election, allegations of vote rigging led to mass protests, later known as the People Power Revolution. Ferdinand Marcos, with his wife Imelda by his side, held the inauguration at Malacanang Palace on the 25th of February of that same year. Ferdinand tried to cling to power, but hundreds of thousands took to the streets, calling for him to step down. Later that day, Ferdinand Marcos, unable to maintain any semblance of legitimacy and fearful of the masses gathering outside the presidential palace gates, finally agreed to step down and was given safe passage for him and his entire family to flee to Hawaii, United States at midnight of the 26th of February, 1986. The extended Marcos family and many close associates arrived in Hawaii with about 80 individuals. Their arrival was controversial, and soon, Hawaii residents called on the government to force the Marcoses to leave. The United States government initially hosted the exiles at Hickam Air Force Base. A month later, Ferdinand and Imelda moved into a pair of residences in Makiki Heights, Honolulu. After Imelda left Malacanang Palace, press reports worldwide took note of her lavish wardrobe. They found numerous expensive artworks, including full-length portraits of Ferdinand and Imelda, a multi-million-dollar collection of her jewelry, and even uneaten caviar atop her dining table. However, discovering what lay in Imelda's closet attracted the most attention: thousands of shoes. Her impressive collection of roughly 1,200 pairs of designer shoes made headlines. Some news reports estimated that there were up to 7,500 pairs, but Time magazine reported that the final tally was 1,060. These fancy footwear pieces became an international symbol of the former ruling couple's flamboyant spending habits and wealth.
It was reported today that Marcos and his group arrived in Honolulu carrying large amounts of cash, gold, and valuables, and that more items, including land titles and stocks, arrived today from the Philippines.
The United States government documented that the Marcos family entered the United States with millions of dollars in cash, stocks, jewelry, and gold kilobars inscribed "To my husband on our 24th anniversary." How did Imelda cope with her new life in exile despite her previous political post in her country? What was her next action and long-term dream when she returned to the Philippines? Keep watching as we feed your curiosity.
Marcos fled to Hawaii with his family and friends, landing on Oahu in February of 1986.
Only news people and security personnel waited for Marcos and his party this morning.
Marcos and her husband eventually settled in Hawaii. The pair seemed to live quite comfortably despite facing legal problems and pressure to return the funds believed to be plundered from the Philippine government. Ferdinand Marcos eventually lost his life in exile in September 1989. His son Bongbong was the only family member present at his deathbed. Not long after her husband's death, Imelda Marcos faced fraud and racketeering charges in an American court. Marcos was charged with misappropriating roughly $200 million from her country, which was used to buy real estate in New York City. Heiress Doris Duke posted Marcos's bail, and actor George Hamilton testified in her defense. Marcos was acquitted in the case. On the 4th of November, 1991, President Corazon Aquino allowed Imelda and her children to return to the Philippines to be formally charged in their tax fraud and corruption cases. The following day after her return from exile, she was arrested by the government, hoping to recoup lost funds in the Marcos Swiss bank accounts to the Philippine government, believed to be held by the former First Lady. However, upon her return from exile, Imelda evaded any real accountability by keeping the focus on her family's grief. She made it her mission to give her late husband a burial at the Philippine Heroes Cemetery, as is customarily granted by sitting presidents for former presidents, but was denied to the former dictator until 2016, when Rodrigo Duterte became president. Duterte has made no secret of his reverence for Marcos. He is consistent in praising Marcos's leadership and the necessity of imposing martial law to fix the country's problems. As formal prosecutions and judgments would take a while, in the interim, Imelda Marcos sought political power for herself once again, running for president in 1992. However, she lost her election bid to military leader Fidel V. Ramos and soon found herself in another court battle. Convicted on corruption charges in 1993, She received a lengthy prison sentence and a $4.3 million fine. She won her first election since returning from exile in the mid-1990s, despite facing a disqualification lawsuit in which the Supreme Court ruled in her favor. She was elected as a Congresswoman of Leyte during the 1995 Philippine general election and served as a member of the country's House of Representatives for several years. She chose not to seek re-election in Congress. Instead, she sought the presidency again in the 1998 Philippine presidential elections, but her conviction was later overturned that same year by her country's Supreme Court. She then withdrew to support the eventual winner, Joseph Estrada. In 2010, she won the election to become the representative for Ilocos Norte province, the area where her late husband was born and where the Marcos family still wields political clout. Two of her children are also in politics. Her daughter Aimee won the post of governor of Ilocos Norte in 2010, and her son Ferdinand Jr. was elected to the National Senate that same year.
Former First Lady Imelda Marcos would like to see her son as president. As she celebrates her 85th birthday Wednesday, Marcos says she still hopes to, quote, bring more help to the Filipino people.
Imelda was open about her desire for Bongbong to become president. "I am practically pushing him to run for a higher office," she told AFP in 2009 when asked if she wanted him to lead the nation. Imelda Marcos, however, may never fully emerged from the shadows of her past. When pressed over the years to answer for her family's crimes, she never bothered too much to defend herself. Instead, she diverted attention to the sick and misdirected government leadership under Corazon Aquino, from which Imelda said the country needed saving. Though most of the 900 civil and criminal cases filed against the Marcoses have been dismissed, Imelda continues to face legal challenges. She was convicted over 2 counts of criminal corruption in 1993, but was acquitted 5 years later, by the time she faced her latest conviction for 7 counts of graft, each worthy of up to 11 years in prison, for illegally funneling about $200 million to Swiss foundations in the 1970s. It was 2018, and she was 89. The court cited her old age and failing health as a factor for bail, and she has since avoided serving any jail time. Some doubt that her health is deteriorating since she is a fully functioning member of Congress and is running for governor in her husband's home province. She was also seen attending her daughter's birthday party on the day the court released her verdict. In 2010, a court ordered Marcos to pay back almost $300,000 in funds believed to have been taken from the National Food Authority during her husband's reign. In 2016, her famed jewelry collection, worth $21 million, was also ordered by the government to be auctioned off. The story of Imelda Marcos has continued to fascinate the media, with a disco-oriented and somewhat controversial musical about her life, Here Lies Love, presented by David Byrne and Fatboy Slim in 2013 at New York's Public Theater. Despite the ups and downs, it was a dream come true for Imelda when her family eventually reclaimed the presidency. Shocking, right? How did this happen? Imelda's seemingly seamless reintegration into Philippine society is partly thanks to a Filipino culture of forgiveness and forgetfulness. In recent years, many voters have expressed a desire to move on from grievances about the past, even electing Marcos Jr. as president in 2022. However, the Marcoses' renewed relevance and political and cultural clout is also the product of a deliberate disinformation campaign they've waged to whitewash their history. Decades after fleeing the Philippines with bags and boxes stuffed with jewels, gold, and cash, former First Lady Imelda Marcos has achieved her ultimate ambition, her son winning the presidency. Imelda has always denied wrongdoing, insisting her husband was rich before he became president. The frail but flamboyant 92-year-old matriarch has been the driving force behind the family's comeback from exile to the peak of power in the presidential polls. President-elect Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos has described his mother as the supreme politician in the family, one who wields a very big influence. Known for her lavish spending, Imelda symbolizes the greed of her husband, Ferdinand Marcos's dictatorship. An estimated $10 billion were stolen from state coffers during his brutal and corrupt 20-year rule, which left the country impoverished. During that time, Imelda collected diamonds, art masterpieces, and thousands of shoes, insisting her taste for luxury was meant to inspire her desperately poor countrymen and women. "My role as First Lady was to set the standard because mass follows class," she told AFP in a 2009 interview from her penthouse apartment in one of Manila's most expensive high-rises. Bongbong's victory marks the completion of her mission to reclaim the presidency and revive the family brand, analysts and observers said. I'm sure she's feeling gratification. What she wanted to happen was for Marcos Jr. to rehabilitate the Marcos name and reclaim the throne that Marcos Sr. occupied. It's happening, said Andres Bautista, who once led a government agency tasked with tracking down the Marcoses' ill-gotten wealth. In recent years, Imelda's health started deteriorating as she underwent a successful angioplasty at St. Luke's Medical Center, Global City, Taguig, in May 2023. She was hospitalized in March of the following year after contracting a suspected case of pneumonia. What do you think about the Marcos family returning to power after their first exile? What do you think will happen to the all-powerful Imelda Marcos? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. You can also click the other links on your screen for more videos.